Hello and welcome everybody to today's live stream about digital literacy skills and the importance for the Caribbean economy. I'm more than happy to welcome my two guests today, Julian J. Robinson, Shadow Minister of Finance and a member of the Jamaican Parliament, who is kind of representing the public sector in today's discussion, and Tyrone Wilson, CEO of the iCreate Institute. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to the discussion.
All right. So the reason for today's discussion, for today's conversation, is the notion that I think, and I'm probably not alone, that we kind of need to think and talk a little bit about future-proof business models for the Caribbean. Meaning, when we look at most Caribbean countries, we see that there's a high dependency from the tourism and hospitality sector, and as you all know, especially during these times, these are one of the sectors that were hit the hardest, and therefore the whole Caribbean economy kind of struggles through that. And I think one way to fight that, or one way to make sure that the economy as a whole, or more specifically the workforce, is more equipped for a more global economy, a more digital economy, is to make sure that on the one hand people are equipped with the right skills, to make sure that they are learning the right things, that give them the right tools for future-proof jobs, and on the other hand what we need to do to make sure that the people have access to the right tools, that they have access to the right trainings, and so forth. And therefore, that will be the kind of overarching question for today's discussion. How can we make sure that, the future generations in the Caribbean are equipped with the right digital skills? And that's my kind of introductory statement. And I want to pass it on to you, Julian. Maybe you can share a little of your thoughts, and maybe then you, Tyrone, and then we can just go a little bit back and forth where you guys see the most need and the most opportunity for change in the future.
All right, thank you, Simon. For me, I think we have to, one, do a holistic look at our educational system. So from children going to the primary school level, there should be exposure to digital literacy skills. I think one positive out of the pandemic is with online schooling, many kids have been forced to get to know how to use their tablets and their computers in a way that probably before they wouldn't have. So, he's now 7. My 7-year-old son is very adept at Zoom and knows everything about Zoom because he has had a year of online schooling. So that is a positive. The downside to that is obviously it highlights the digital divide, because for kids who have access, it's good for them, but for those who don't. So I think the first thing is ensuring that at the level of starting from the primary school level, where kids from 3, 4, 5, and they're very curious, very in a mood to learn, that they're taught digital literacy skills, the basics of navigating a device and what they can do online. And that should continue throughout high school, obviously, as you become more advanced. And also to ensure that for those who may not be fortunate to continue that track, that, for example, the Heart Trust, which is our training agency, that it has mandatory or compulsory courses on that. We had to do, when we were at high school, maths and English as compulsory courses. Digital literacy should be compulsory. And it's important at every level, at the personal level. What COVID has taught us is that some companies have pivoted and will never go back to doing what they did prior to COVID. you're going to have to do transactions online because banks are closing physical branches. Utility companies are closing their physical branches. More and more, the world is moving to doing more things online. So you are forcing people actually to operate in this environment. There are some who may be more adept because they are, they're younger, etc. But government through policy must ensure that we bring everybody to the same level by ensuring that these skills are available for a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old, because that's one of the things that I think is a challenge. Older people are the ones who have a greater difficulty in navigating this space. So for me, to summarize, I would say our educational system must incorporate digital skill training at an early age. And we must also ensure that those who may not have gotten it during school have an opportunity to sign up for a class, do something online so that they can become adept at digital literacy courses.
Yeah, Tyrone, what do you think, or what do you see rather? What are the skills that the market demands? What companies are looking for?
Yeah. Thanks, Simon. I mean, totally agree with the points raised by Julian just now. And, before I jump into, the skills needed and so forth, one thing I'll add, about that great digital divide in more developing countries like Jamaica, the risk and the impact made where that is concerned tends to linger a bit longer than some of the more advanced countries. So what it means is that we, as a country here in Jamaica, we need to do more in terms of, assisting the most vulnerable at this stage, because it can create a pandemic within a pandemic, right? When you think about education or entire, individuals in primary school level, high school level, mostly in the rural areas, they have suffered the most, right? They've suffered where they're by the end of this year they'll miss almost 2 years of school, right? When we're counting by terms. Not everyone is fortunate enough to have the tablets available, or even when they do have the tablets available, they don't have the internet connection available. In some areas in Jamaica, they don't even have the smartphones, right? And affordable data to use to access these classes. And what you find where that is concerned is that on top of trying to navigate the pandemic, which has pretty much spurred a digital revolution, they're left out of that entire digital revolution, conversation and actions and so forth. So in my mind around programs, one thing for us, like at I Create last year, we quickly saw that there will be a demand for digital skills. And I believe it was around April, a few weeks after the pandemic, we did a free course. We did several free courses in search engine optimization, social media, digital marketing to assist individuals to, understand the world of digital some more. We've expanded that this year to start in a complete program called Digital Awareness, which we're giving away. Where our intention is to give 10,000 individuals access to this program, where, as it says, it's just straight digital awareness. One thing we found recently, for example, the seniors in who are customers of banks have been complaining a lot because, branches are closing, they are being forced to go online, and they don't understand these apps and online banking and all of this. So before I was talking about the vulnerable in the rural areas and the children there and so forth, but now the seniors, which is almost some of our most vulnerable. And what happens with this, Simon, is that when they don't understand, they are the ones who are prone to be scammed, right? They with phishing and
Right.
tampering with their online access and transferring their funds. and all of this. So I think overall there needs to be a collaborative effort, between ourselves, private sector, government organization, and so forth to push more digital awareness, cybersecurity, data security, online tools, all of these things, and just trends and what is happening. So we have shifted our business model a bit to purely around these things on digital. So we're working, with different organizations and so forth. But I think it needs to be a kind of wider effort because with what will happen is that we will be left behind. We won't truly make that digital transformation if all of the population is not on board.
So when we look a little from a global perspective, I think on the one hand we need to make sure that the skills that are taught are in demand in the Caribbean itself, or important and actually helping Jamaican organizations, for example. But I think we need also keep in mind to be competitive in a global economy, meaning, okay, what is a global market looking for? So what do you guys think, what could be a starting point to reach these goals?
Well, for me, as Tyrone said, the first starting point has to be to address the divide. We have always had a divide in Jamaica, but COVID has made it worse. And as Tyrone said, we are starting the 2nd September in COVID with online schooling. And sadly, the majority of Jamaican kids do not have access to education. If they're fortunate to get a device, and online, I mean, I'm hoping we'll get to face-to-face soon if we can get the vaccination rates up. But, without that access to education, we're going to have 2 years of missed school, which will make it almost difficult, if not impossible, for these kids to catch up. And we're going to have a generation of kids who are going to be, just left out of the system. So I think a lot greater effort has to be made around both devices, but also internet access, ensuring that we put in place these community access points so that obviously if you can't afford it at home, because again, the majority of Jamaicans don't have fixed internet access at home, they can go to a community center, use either their phone or tablet, or if there are computers there, access education. And you can use some of those same community centers to offer online courses for seniors, because I don't want to forget those persons who are older, who are now being forced into a world that they have absolutely no training or exposure in, but they're being forced because, you have to apply, for example, we have a vaccination grant for people over 60. You have to do it online. All the payment is done online. So people are being forced into a world which prior to this they've had no exposure to. But for me, the biggest imperative in Jamaica is dealing with the divide, because there are many implications if we don't address it, socioeconomic implications. There are different levels of training that I think are required. There's obviously just a basic thing for beginners who are not exposed to the internet. And then, the private sector through Tyrone and others who are offering what I would call a little more sophisticated courses for people who already understand the internet, but who want to become more knowledgeable, who probably want to use it as a tool to make money. I think the private sector can do that. But for me, government must ensure that it offers the basic skills so that people know how to navigate, so that people, you'll be surprised, there are a lot of people who don't have proper email addresses, don't know how to go online. There are a lot of people in that category. So some of those basic skills I think need to be taught, and government should play that role. Then the more sophisticated things, I believe the private sector can come on board and offer those courses.
So when I understand you right, or let me rephrase the question, what would be what is the bigger problem right now to get the devices to the people in the rural areas, or make sure that the internet connectivity
It's
is there?
both. It's both. So particularly in rural areas, you have an issue. Both have access to devices, but also internet connectivity. As you know, in every country, the telecoms companies focus on the populated areas because that's where you can get the majority of subscribers and you can make the return on the investment. And the investment is significant. When you run in fiber, it's underground, it costs a lot to put in. So you obviously are focused on the areas that you're going to get the greatest return. It does mean, however, that in the deep rural areas, the level of coverage is just not there. So one is ensuring that the coverage is there so that people can have internet access. And then secondly, ensuring that devices are there. Now, the reality is no government can provide devices for every child that needs it. And what you have to do, which is why, again, I'm a little disappointed that we haven't made more progress with using, for example, community centers with community access points so that people can go there. Even in urban areas where people have access, meaning the connectivity is there, a lot of people can't afford to have a monthly subscription where they're paying one of the providers to have unlimited internet access. So again, if you had a community access point which provided that, that would help. So even if people have a telephone, which is a smartphone, they could go to the center and have internet access. Because one of the challenges in Jamaica, the majority of Jamaicans are what we call prepaid customers of telephone services. So they buy credit every week, etc. If your child is on a Zoom call for a day, that's going to use up all the data they have. And so what happens in the school system is that the child logs on maybe for an hour and then comes off, or comes on a Monday but can't come on a Wednesday because the credit isn't there. So again, you know, these community centers, I believe, are critical to facilitating persons in even in the urban centers who just simply can't afford to be online all the time.
Yeah, I like the idea of the community center, even from a technical standpoint, because maybe, or probably I'm too optimistic here, but that would be probably something the government could finance. For example, when we take a technology like Starlink, which doesn't require such a big investment, like a landline or fiber cable or something like that, put it in a community center, meaning have the little satellite dish on the roof that costs, I think, $100 or something a month. Probably a government institution could get a better deal on scale, and then you could provide a whole community with fast and reliable, or at least somewhat reliable internet access. Are these some
So let me say,
thoughts?
Simon, that's what the Universal Service Fund is supposed to be doing. And in fact, last year, the government had committed to putting in 3 centers in each constituency of a member of parliament. They've started with 1 in my own constituency, which I hope will be completed soon. But I'm saying greater urgency and resources needs to be put into a program like this so that, you know, we're in the 2nd September of COVID and still there are many kids who don't have access to online. And given our very low vaccination rates, it is not likely that we're going to get immediately back to face-to-face schooling right now.
I want to hear your thoughts, Tyrone, but just for the audience, if you have any questions or any thoughts, yeah, let us know in the chat or in the comment section. I'm monitor them closely and yeah, pick up the questions whenever they fit in the conversation. And of course, feel free to hit the like button and share the conversation with everybody you think can benefit from it. Sorry, Tyrone, didn't want to cut you off.
No problem at all, Simon. I mean, what I like to add is that I think it is critical to realize that after, for me, I feel, very promising in terms of these kind of what I would call side effects caused by the COVID-19. I give some context why. When I started my company in 2008, it was all about digital, right? It was all about online media, internet access, where the world is going. And, it really took something like COVID-19 to accelerate some of the things that, myself and other entrepreneurs in Jamaica were talking about in terms of, digital and the fourth industrial revolution and so forth. Now we're seeing, as a result of necessity, the entire population is embracing the use of online. They're embracing ordering online. They're embracing doing a lot more banking transactions online. Businesses have added, a lot of change from a digital perspective to their processes in terms of getting things done. Electronic signatures are more widely accepted and all of these things. It will help to really get us where we need to be. But the harsh reality is that if we don't continue to embrace it, even after COVID-19, continue to invest in it and so forth, as a country, we'll be left behind. So this is not anymore about just, like education and online classes and so forth. A lot of outsourcing will be happening. When you look at the BPO sector, for example, the reason why the BPO sector is booming, the business process outsourcing sector, the reason why that is booming is because of that change, in terms of online processes and so forth. More individuals are needed to help businesses to make that transition and maintain it. If we as a country don't ensure that at a minimum the digital literacy and awareness skills are there, and then two, from a more professional training perspective, that is there, we'll find that these jobs will be sourced to other countries, right? And we will be left out. So one is critical to ensure that the businesses themselves move to this, but the second is to ensure that the human infrastructure is there from a knowledge perspective to enable the businesses to make that shift. We're working with a number of companies, corporate companies, in terms of one, just training their workforce. A lot of new jobs are being popped up, or jobs that were a little bit more under the radar, or front of mind now, like UX, user experience specialists and so forth. People, the more you go online, the more they need to ensure that when the user access your platform, there's a certain experience that is given, similar to if they walk into the physical space, just from a user perspective. The term customer experience has now been termed CX, and that is being used. And then to move that a bit further, digital customer experience, which is DCX, is also being well sought after. And that's the reason, because it is different than interacting with someone in person, in a physical space, right? How someone would transact business, how they would lodge a complaint. The more you're online now, you have more risk, in terms of your digital, well, your reputation, but more in the digital space. When someone used to have a problem before the pandemic, and before the growth of like Twitter and some of those platforms, they would call and they would curse. Now they're gonna do that publicly, right? So online reputation managers, all of these jobs, these things are new, Simon, and before now we tend to just see it as small new jobs, but now they are the top 10. They're in the top 10 in terms of skills that will be needed in the fourth industrial revolution. So I think the biggest thing, and I don't need to sound biased because we're a training organization, but I think the biggest thing is filling that skills gap. That not just the digital divide itself, but the skills gap in general that will come as a result. Because the things that we were training people for last year, before the pandemic, and in 2019, those aren't the most in-demand jobs now, right? And that has happened in just 12 months, right? 12 to 18 months. So we can imagine what will happen when we begin to feel the real effects of the pandemic, because we're still in it. There's going to be that post period where, it will be clear in terms of our vision, in terms of the scope, and we will have those gaps. And we're going to see the issues that were created as a result of the pandemic, and we're going to it might be too late then to be able to catch up with the rest of the world. So we have to really try and deal with the problem right
The question I would have for Tyrone is how do we ensure that like our public system, and it's difficult because
now.
it takes a while to change curriculum,
Yes.
curricula,
Yes.
etc. But as you said, there are some jobs that are in demand now that weren't in demand 12, 18 months ago. How would we get like Heart Trust to adapt to those kind of changes and put those things at the forefront now? That I think is really you can do it as a small, nimble organization, but for a more broad-based approach, how you think we
Yeah.
could get that in the public sector?
So we have been working with Heart Trust, for example, also. But we were working with them on the traditional creative courses like video production, photography, and so forth. What is necessary now as a result of the pandemic is that Heart has to change also, right? But then Heart scope of changing, as you suggested, Julian, is that it is harder because you have to develop the program, one, and then two, it has to go through the NCT vet and the other regulatory bodies. And sometimes these things take 6 months, 12 months. The good thing about change in terms of skills training is that, and you mentioned it just now, there's a basic awareness, and then there are the short professional courses. These tend to go through a less rigorous accreditation system than a degree that is more expensive and takes a lot more time commitment. And when we look on what is happening now from an educational standpoint, you have companies like iCreate who are popping up all over the world, because they are focused not on degrees but on short training. And that is really the low-hanging fruit as to how we make that impact most immediately is to invest in these short courses. And short for me right now to impact is defined as a week to a month, right? So there are other short courses like the 3 month courses and so forth, 6 months, 1 year. But to really make an impact now, there are programs in e-commerce, for example. We have them at Direct that you can roll out. It's 2 weeks to 4 weeks, right? And they will have a good grasp of what to do right now. But then as the field evolves and get more dynamic and carries a certain impact, right? What will happen is that there will be more areas added to e-commerce, for example, more technologies added and support, and then that will create a demand for more training within that field. But as it is now, it's kind of the more introductory that is necessary. And like Hart and those guys, Julian, is what I would tend to try to push with those organizations. What I would tend to push people with government with the awareness courses and so forth. Because if we look at like the risk, like I mentioned before, one of the big problems is going to be online fraud. There are some simple things that you can learn that will protect your own personal businesses and accounts, and also government systems, business systems, and so forth. Like, someone can do phishing where they pretty much create a fraudulent website that mirrors the other traditional one that and a senior citizen who's not familiar with this at all, what they've done is to clone a building. So imagine in a physical world, right, where you go into Scotia and they've cloned Scotia Bank, and there's one to the left, and you go in that fake Scotia Bank and do business and realize you spent money to a fraudulent personal account. That's what is being happening online and so forth, and that's how people are accessing people's bank account and getting funds transferred to them and so forth. So just that simple awareness, for example, can reduce those risks and build a certain level of awareness and so forth, because we are going to be graded eventually. These things are going to happen, Julian. 5-10 years from now, countries will be graded based on, for example, their own individual digital awareness amongst their citizens. That will impact foreign direct investments and so forth, right? We might not see it as a major thing now, but imagine a company looking to make, a big technology company looking to make an investment in Jamaica and want to come here to do business, set up shop and employ people. one thing they're going to look at is our human capital, right? How much are we advanced in understanding this field and so forth. It's just like any other investment. This is going to impact us on a wider scale. We don't see it now, but if we take a step back and think a little bit more, make some assumptions, because that's what business and planning is all about. We have to make assumptions, right? And in some of those assumptions being fueled by the history, things that has happened in the past that we know will have similar outcomes in the future.
So when I understand the question, or the problem rather, that you're stating, Julian, correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, we probably all agree that digital literacy skills are the future, or that we need to equip younger generation. But the problem is, as Tyrone said, the environment and the curriculum is changing so fast that the public sector is maybe not even trained right now, or the teachers not even able and equipped and trained to teach these things. And also with looking into the future, how do we make sure that we are flexible enough, or that the public sector is flexible enough to adapt and change the things that are taught depending on the economy or the market demands. And I think the question here is, can the public sector alone provide that? Do we need or does only the private sector, as you said, is flexible and nimble enough to do that? Or is it a cooperation or a hybrid model that we see in the future? Is that...
So for me, I think the public sector has to lead on doing what I would call, you might have a digital literacy 101, right? An introduction so that people can understand the basics. The private sector comes in with some of the things Tyrone spoke about. If you want to be a customer experience expert, well, not an expert, but you want to choose that as a profession which will put you in a position to earn, then you should pay for a course like that, because you are equipping yourself to improve your own capabilities so that you can promote and market yourself. But where I think the public sector has to play the role is just the basic introductions. And some of the cybersecurity things, as Tyrone said, I mean, if you look at a website and the URL, is it secure? Should I go on it? I can't tell you how many times I've gotten on WhatsApp in different WhatsApp groups, these things that are sent around. Click on this and you're going to earn, some free thing. And it gets sent around thousands of times. And you would believe that people could see this and know it's a scam, but they still believe it, And I've seen in the last couple of months many of these. And these are sensible people. Some of them are well educated. So there's clearly a need for some kind of exposure. For me, I think, these things don't have to be expensive, because you can incorporate online training in many of these things. It can be a hybrid, so you don't have to necessarily have physical face-to-face exposure. And a lot of these things can be done online. But I believe the public sector has to lead in getting the basic digital literacy skills taught.
And how would we do that or establish a kind of, as you said, digital literacy 101 course from the awareness that we have a kind of time pressure? And I will jump into one or two of the questions that we got from the audience so far. I see you guys. Because I think even if we say today, okay, we have to implement these things or change them, do you think these changes can be made fast enough to make sure that, as we said, not a whole generation is left behind because they just don't have access to that kind of education? What do you think?
Well, I think it is going to put more pressure on policymakers. The Ministry of Education, they'll probably have to look at how they review curricula and approve curricula and do it try to reduce the time it takes to do that. because maybe by the time you have done the review, what you're reviewing is no longer relevant. So, but I think it is absolutely necessary at the public school level from primary school that some kind of course may sound heavy, but some kind of exposure. And it doesn't need to be for a year. It can be something as part of the curriculum every day for half an hour. There is some exposure to this, or a couple of days a week, so that as you're using the technology, you're being taught about the dangers of cybersecurity, the things that you need to embrace. And the reason I emphasize primary school level, the kids at that age are more easily brought into the loop. They're very curious, they learn a lot, they're using the tablets to play games, etc. They can learn a lot better at that stage. And you obviously you can make it a little more advanced as you get to the high school, secondary school level. But I believe we have to find a way to do it now. And the Tyrones, iCrates, and other companies can do the very specific courses which are important in positioning people for jobs, not just here in Jamaica, but worldwide. I mean, some of the jobs Tyrone spoke about, you could physically stay in Jamaica and do it, work for companies all over the world. And that's very important for us in terms of earning foreign exchange as a country.
Yeah, that's true. I want to get to a question from YouTube that is for you, Julian. I think that fits quite nicely. By the way, to the LinkedIn user that said good morning. Yeah, good morning to you too. You have probably set up your privacy settings in a way that I can't see your name. I only see LinkedIn user, so you might want to change that. And the question from Mark on YouTube is, I believe that this trust should be championed by the ICT authority, as they would be better placed in handling this initiative. Question to Julian: can you speak on the ICT authority here in Jamaica? So I don't know the details here.
Okay, what I know, the ministry, the ICT authority was actually established and approved. I don't know if it is operational as yet. The Minister of Technology would best be able to answer that. But they went through the process, the changes, the legislative changes have been made. Whether it is actually working that way, I don't know. And I wouldn't have enough information to say that definitively. But I do agree they would be probably the right place to champion that kind of initiative in Jamaica, yes.
So what part of the government, when we're talking about that right now anyway, what part of the government would be in your eyes not responsible for that, but the right people to talk to? Are we talking about the education sector here, or is that more in the ICT?
It's going to be a combination. I think, as Mark said in his note, the ICT authority would fall under the Ministry of Technology. But I think the Ministry of Technology would have to work very closely with the Ministry of Education because, as I said, it needs to be incorporated, in my view, in the curriculum in schools. So in a sense, I think it would be both ministries working closely together to ensure, one, the relevance of what is being taught, and then to infuse it into our educational system.
Tyrone, question for you. When you, from the private sector perspective, what would you, if you could make a wish, what would be your wish for the government or the education sector in terms of support for organizations like you, meaning for private companies that try to push education or digital education rather more? I hope we didn't lost you.
Simon, I think that my connection froze just now. Could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, sure. The question is, if you could make a wish to the government or to the policymakers, what would be the kind of support you are looking for to enable, on the one hand, private companies more to provide the education, but also maybe support in other areas?
Well, I think one thing Julian mentioned about like the ministry reviewing the contents of the programs and relevance of them think my biggest wish is around the speed in which we move, right? We have, as I mentioned, we have to react to this thing as quickly as possible. So changing some of the policies internally that impacts the speed to review and approve these things is my biggest wish. Right? As an institution, we can move quickly in terms of developing these programs. And in a private sector world, we can develop and deliver in a very short time. We also have global partnerships that we tap into in terms of our course content and so forth and accredited courses. But the minute it comes to implementing those in the public schools and in government and so forth, obviously there has to be a certain kind of regulatory process that you review and ensure its relevance and approve and distribute and so forth. That speed needs to be quick because the pandemic came on us without warning, and every month there's a change. There's a change in transmission rates, in death, in all sorts of things, and every time there's a new strain or a change or whatever, the first reaction really is to restrict movement, and the minute movement is restricted, everything get impacted, including most our livelihoods in terms of earning and doing business and individuals continuing to make money to feed their families and so forth. So as we tend to make these shifts, we need to be able to ensure that the new reality that we have to exist in, we can actually survive there from a skills perspective and get things done. When we look at, sorry, Simon, when we look at even schools, I give you a quick example. In 2019, we approached Michael University College, and they've been very forward thinking in us collaborating and so forth. And the main objective of reaching out to Michael University, right, was to develop, design, and deliver programs that will enable teachers to survive and execute training in a digital environment, in a virtual space and so forth. This was 2019 before the pandemic. And this is more an indictment on even us I create, right? We we took some time. We weren't as aggressive in terms of our timelines to get it done, but we signed the MOU, was out in the media, and the main intention here was to work with Micro to do that because Micro is a teachers college, right? So the idea is to work with Micro to enable teachers to not just deliver training in a classroom setting, but an online setting. This was 2019, so before COVID-19, right, in Jamaica. And bam, COVID came in March 2020. And what was one of the biggest fallout and the earliest and biggest fallout? Delivering classes online, right? So forget just the devices and the internet connection and so forth. The, delivering classes online is not just, it's not the same as in the classroom. It requires different tools and technology, and it requires an enhanced communication skills also, right? It's difficult to reprimand, discipline, or whatever a student, like if you have them in front of you physically in class, So, and then delivering the programs, delivering math is different from delivering accounts or English language or literature, online versus in person. So that was the whole idea of the program itself. So that's just an example, Simon, of how important it is in these times to be able to move quick, right? And it's not even just the government, but it's us, the private sector.
Dennis Sims, good morning. Now it looks like it's working. Adenis Sim says, well, during the pandemic has definitely shown us the importance of the digital economy to allow and provide opportunities for work in the digital space, as there is a shift or hybrid of brick and mortar. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And maybe pick up on that notion, Tyrone. What would you say? What are let's call them the basic skills, or as Julian earlier said, the 101 skills that you would like to see that people or children that leaving school and entering the workforce, meaning now they are becoming or entering the professional workforce, maybe they want to educate themselves or acquire additional skills. What would be the baseline, the basic skills that that younger generation should be able to? Should they also already be able to code? Is that nowadays an absolute minimum requirement for everybody? Are we talking about different aspects here? What would be your point of view?
Well, there are some simple, more basic than coding, and one thing, for example, is GDPR. Well, sorry, it's data security. I mentioned it probably a number of times now, but the GDPR rules, developed in the UK, for example, countries can be fined. A country can be fined now, um, if they are found negligent in allowing citizens of the UK, for example, or EU, I believe, found to have exposed their data, right? And what I mean by that is, for example, we've had some data leaks in the past. I think there was one with what's that app again? The Jam COVID, for example. There was that leak where tourist data would have been exposed, and possibly tourists from the UK, if those things were found to be negligent and so forth. There could be fines in the millions of euros and pounds, for example, that can cripple an economy, right? It's as simple as that. I don't, I really don't want to sound too much where that is concerned, but that is reality, right? So, on a simple basic training, Simon, um, data security, right? Another one, and data security, because obviously if our data get compromised now, the risks are far-reaching, right? It's far-reaching, and there are some simple steps we can take to avoid a lot of these things, like two-step verification. But if you ask a 12-year-old what that is, 9-year-old, maybe they don't know. If you ask a senior citizen what that is, they don't know. So that those basic skills are critical. And if you ask the average man, sometimes they don't know, right? Two-step verification is the norm now in terms of data protection and account protection and so forth. There are other things like productivity tools, that if you're going to work in a more digital, virtual space, obviously there are tools that you need to familiarize yourself with. Simple things like collaborating on documents online now. Like I used to take that for granted because I use Google Drive, Google Workspace, and I can share documents with my team in real time, collaborate on them, and make changes, and we're way more productive, and it helps, being remote from each other. It helps a lot in terms of productivity and so forth. But there are still people who are using the desktop versions, right? There are still people who are using the desktop versions with some of these tools, for example, and they left home and somebody needs to access it and they can't reach it. They have to wait until I'm home and send it back to you. That's the early 2000s, the late 90s, for example. We have to start to use these tools that are more in the cloud. So cloud productivity tools, cloud technology, and so forth. Other tools like customer relationship management tools, how you lodge a complaint, for example, like Oftentimes we'll use a website and we'll lodge a complaint and they say that, okay, your ticket is XYZ, right? Those things are necessary too. Those are some basic skills because that's how you're going to manage your customers better, right? How you're going to manage your reputation as a business and so forth. So there are some of those basic things, Simon, that, in government, for example, go far away. If you're dealing with like the tax office or you're dealing with, some other places that is high traffic in government, for example, you still have to call and hold and wait forever. And with a lot of private sector businesses are guilty of it also, right? But these are some basic things that if done can make a huge impact. And I mean, obviously implementing these would mean training people to use them. So these things are critical. There are a lot of them, but at the foundation, they're the same features and functionality and so forth. So those are two examples. The productivity tools such as customer relationship management and basic cybersecurity awareness.
Any thoughts, Julian?
No, I'm agreeing with Tyrone. I think that exposure is absolutely necessary. The cybersecurity element, because as more activities, e-commerce, economic activities take place online, the threats become even more amplified. And for people who are not adept, the phishing, all these other things are out there. So I think providing that exposure, particularly to younger kids and seniors, is important. But also, just as I said, giving them the basics so they can navigate the space, because there are many things which will, even when we're through with COVID, we're not going to go back to what we used to do in the physical world, because for businesses, for governments, it's just not economical or productive to do so. So it's a quantum change in behavior that is going to be required of a lot of people. Financial institutions are closing branches. They're not going to go back to physical branches in any significant way. Same thing with utilities and other service providers. I want to see government. I see there you can renew your driver's license online now in Jamaica. We have to push more and more of those activities so that people don't have to spend half a day in the tax office trying to get transactions done. So more and more of these things are going to be pushed online and people are going to be required to do it. You won't have a choice. So it is important that they are given the skills and the exposure to do these things and to do it now.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. The question for me is, how do we finance that at the end of the day? Because I think most people see the potential in terms of productivity or maybe even cost savings for also the government. But as you said earlier on, the government probably cannot afford to equip every child, every student with the necessary hardware and so on. So what would be your starting point? Is the most necessary construction site that we should start? And on the other hand, how or what would be a way to financing the whole
I think you have
change
to
or the whole
find,
transformation?
in the same way that we're delivering courses online, I think a lot of what I'm saying has to be done online, which reduces obviously the cost of doing it in a physical sense. You may have to do some physical, but I think you can find a fairly simple way to design some of these things that they can be taught online. And that's where I would go. I would start there. But, one of the challenges that we've had with COVID is that many of the teachers never had any formal training about how to do these things online. They were thrust almost overnight into a scenario where they had to teach online. And, if you've never done it, it's hard. How do you keep the attention of 20, 30 kids in a class where they're all on Zoom? There are techniques, but we haven't had that exposure. So it's also important that the practitioners who are going to be doing some of the things that we require, particularly in our public school system, that they be given the tools so that they can do it well and do it in an efficient way and an effective way.
What would be the youngest age in your guys' opinion when we should start training children, exposing children to
5,
tablets,
4,
however we
4 or
want to call
5.
it? 4 or 5 already?
Yeah,
Okay.
because they're using it anyway. I mean, my son is just 7 now, but he's on it playing games, so they know how to use it because they play games on it. They take your phone, they download stuff, so they are doing it. My 2-year-old daughter, she wants the phone all the time to play on it. So, I don't think we should wait. They're using the technology at this stage, so so I would say probably 4 or 5, maybe grade 1 as an example. Maybe at grade 1 is when you do it, but for the kids who have the access, they're on it. They're playing games on it.
Funny enough, Julian, I said that I remember seeing an ad a long time ago, maybe like 8 years ago, if not more, right? Where there was a startup company that introduced a product, and they introduced the product. I'm not sure if you saw it, Julian, this online program or whatever, but all of a sudden they're seeing a lot of sales coming in, like, the business is exploding, and they begin to make plans, they begin to expand, they got more locations, they even did an IPO. And what was happening in the back end was that there there was a parent's child just pressing the buy button on their phone, like just pressing the buy button, pressing the buy button, pressing the buy button. And this company started to expand. And I believe, I don't remember what the message behind the ad was, but I think it was saying to companies to build a stronger e-commerce infrastructure or something like that, because we can make decisions based on bad data. It was something like that, right? I want to try and find it and share it, but it's an example of what can happen in this online world.
Well, I can tell you, this is real, and my wife won't kill me for saying it. But so our son's account online is tied to her credit card, and then she would be at work and she gets a notice that you have just purchased this thing for $10 and $15, and he just kept downloading stuff
Yes.
until she just had to disconnect it, because he would just be he is supposed to be in online school, and then she would get a pop-up that he has downloaded something, and that's what he was doing. He got
Yep.
bored in the online school in the class, and then just started downloading stuff.
Yep.
And I think also a lot of games have that now kind of inbuilt, that when you want the next level or the better
right,
character or tools or
purchases.
something, exactly in-game purchasing and that kind of stuff. Yeah. But it's not the first time that we hear about that, as you said, that the children hit the buy button. Yeah, that's true. But that also kind of feeds back into the notion that I think or to give the question back to you guys, I think I totally agree with the statement that cybersecurity, data security, and so on are super important. But from what I can see, it's not so much the technology side, meaning that there would be any technology hacked or cracked or compromised, but you mentioned that data hack, I think in the beginning of this year, where all the data about the tourists were leaked. That is often just a lack of education how to protect these systems, meaning, as you said earlier on, what is a two-factor authentication, or in the case of the data leak, I think it was just that the server where all the data was stored didn't have any password, so everybody that had the address of that server basically could access that kind of data. So I would totally agree with the notion that we need to, not only the younger people, but also, as you said earlier on, the more senior citizens, and that kind of more behavior side of, I don't know how to call that, but probably more in the social engineering space, that we need to train people better in that areas to be not so vulnerable.
Yeah.
So what would be or are there any plans, Julian, from the government side that you can talk about, that you know of, to really, because we mentioned it a few times now, that I think speed is the important variable here, because as you said, we're started in September, the new school year, as far as I know, and things are changing on the one hand super fast technology-wise. On the other hand, we can't really see an end of the whole pandemic situation. Maybe that will be with us for the next few years. So do you see any plans from your perspective?
What I know the government is doing, which is not so much at the training level, but they are providing grants and loans through the Development Bank of Jamaica for companies who want to upgrade their digital skills. And I don't know the criteria necessarily for qualification, but I do know those grants are available. I don't know the process, but I know that being done at the level of government. I don't know if I don't have enough information because I'm not in government to find out whether at the educational level, whether there is significant progress on trying to build those digital literacy programs. I'm not sure. But as I said, I know at the level of the Ministry of Finance, there is some support being provided for businesses who want to upgrade their own digital capabilities.
But and do I understand you correctly that there are not, at least not much approaches in terms of changing the education sector or training the staff?
The problem is I don't know enough to say definitively. I haven't heard, but I wouldn't want to say it's not being done, but I certainly haven't heard anything in the public domain which suggests that it is being done. So I don't know enough to say deliberately.
And what do you guys think? How could we, because I think that's probably one of the biggest bottlenecks, how could we train the teachers, basically? Because I think, these are also often people that are probably untrained and also got thrown into the pool and have to learn to swim now. So are there, what are your thoughts on that note?
I think that has to be a priority, but a priority and something that has to be dealt with immediately, because the teachers. My own estimate is we're going to be in online schooling at least for the rest of this year. It's important that the teachers are given the capabilities so that they can deliver the classes better. If they're not, then you're just going to lose. For those who are fortunate to be online, you're going to lose more and more of them simply because they don't know how to, they're not being taught in the best or efficient or effective way. So I do think, given the teachers the skills and the capabilities, those things are critically important at this stage.
Do you see any progress or any training in that regards, Tyrone? Or are people asking you?
Again, I don't know. There may be, but I haven't seen any in the public domain.
Yeah, I think we're still in survival mode. So there hasn't been a lot happening in terms of, like major shifts. Some of the things that will need to take place in the short term is more training programs. I see my colleague Ricardo from 101 has a partnership with Flow. They're also doing some courses, free programs with trainers, with teachers, and so forth. I say my other colleague, Gordon Swaby, one of Eddie Focal, that has launched online academies and so forth, and kind of working with teachers on a private sector level. We have to kind of deal with the immediate threats, but also think long term, because I believe we have to start to embed these things in our curriculum, in the degrees, for sure, because more and more there are going to be a lot of online schools available, whether basic or university level. And it impacts the overall economy also, because we have a lot of teachers who are complaining about low salaries and so forth. And what's going to happen now? There are going to be job opportunities, global job opportunities after this for teachers wherever you are, to train in some place in New Zealand without have to worry about leaving your family and leaving your country. There are so much positives in this, Simon, that we have to kind of think some more and invest now, because these opportunities are going to be made available for a lot of people who need it. So there's not much being done. I think we're all in survival mode, damage control mode, but we have to avoid the mistake of doing too little, right? We have to take some bigger plans in terms of some bigger risk taken in terms of solving these problems right now. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, there's a broader global implication if we don't.
So when you're saying that, yeah, the necessary curriculums are not in place yet for different reasons, what would you recommend to first, let's say, a professional that thinks about, future-proof jobs or skills that he or she needs on the one hand, but on the other hand, and I think we talked about that earlier on, for the younger generation, especially the ones that maybe do not have access to these private, education sources, private schools, private online education, what would you recommend? Well, what would be a solution for that demographic?
Well, there's not even one way. The truth is there's so many fallouts from what is happening right now. In our economy, from a business perspective, from just disposable income, people's ability to pay for programs. I think a lot of people want to do these things. When we just had a program sponsored by NCB called Level Up by the NCB Foundation, and I create alone. We train around 1,500 individuals in digital skills, right? A lot of different programs, digital customer experience, UX, social media, e-commerce, coding, data security. But we had 3 times the application, right? We're only able to accept 1/3 of the applicants we got. So that's just an indication that there's an appetite out there in terms of wanting to learn, and wanting to pivot and adapt. The problem here, is one, the lack of more entities like NCB doing these things, whether private, public sector, and two, a kind of lot more flexible financing options for them to pay for these programs too. Credit being available to them. Because as much as they are necessary, there are more pressing things that people need to pay for, like maybe internet access, food, their bills, and a lot of them are, they move from full-time jobs to part-time jobs. Um, you know, their time is limited too, because on top of being able, needing to work, they have kids at home that they have to try to attend to. They can't afford babysitters. There's so many things playing against us right now, as a result of the whole pandemic. But there are some low-hanging fruits that I mentioned, so that we should continue to pursue. This is a time now that calls for a lot more, volunteering and charitable deeds. Push the private sector even more to do more where that is concerned. And we've had a history of that as a country in helping others in times of need. So we have to continue these things and so forth. But more while we do that, we will continue to develop and design more advanced programs, because these teachings, the need for these skills is only going to mature in terms of the dynamics, in terms of how complex these topic areas will be 5 years from now. and more companies are going to be demanding employees with these skill sets. So it's not okay, let's get out of COVID, let's just survive COVID kind of situation. It's going to be bigger. It's going to be more in demand after the COVID-19 pandemic. It's almost like a storm. Yes, you see the damage and everything, but just when the storm clears, you tend to see the depth of how much we were impacted as a country.
Yeah,
your thoughts, Julian?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what Tyrone has said. You have to tackle this at multiple levels, and in a sense, you have to quote unquote walk and chew gum. There is an immediate, which we are in, and then there is a preparation for what will happen after. And there may be both of the same, or there may be different types of skills that are required. And as such, it requires an adept public sector that can respond quickly, that can design things, that can get approvals done in a shorter period of time so that we can implement quicker, so that the benefits or the skills we're trying to impart get to the targeted audience in a shorter or more relevant time frame. It also presents a lot of opportunities, I believe. When we look at one of the sectors that has grown in Jamaica over COVID is the BPO sector. And what the BPO sector has demonstrated at the most basic level is that you can stay in one country and provide services to people all over the world. But we don't want to just be doing what I would call the basic customer service. We want to elevate that to another level. We want to provide more technical skills so that people, university graduates, don't have to believe that the call center is their only option, but they can build skills that allow them to stay in Jamaica, earn a decent salary while providing services all over the world. That's in essence what the BPO model has shown. And it is clear that, Jamaica is an attractive location. We have English speaking, well educated population, by and large, good infrastructure. So to me, it also presents opportunities. And I think we have to position ourselves quickly for those things that, when this pandemic is done, we are in pole position, certainly within the region and this side of the world.
Let's dream a little bit. Let's say I, for whatever reason, have 10 billion, 100 million US dollar, and we have to allocate that money for exactly that reasons. Where would we start? What would be the allocation of that 100 million US dollar to make sure, okay, for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, the education sector, the workforce, the whole Caribbean, or especially Jamaica, is bullet and future-proof in an economic
Well, for me, you have to deal with some of the infrastructural issues. Infrastructure, I'm not talking about roads or water, I'm talking about digital infrastructure, ensuring that people can have access and can have access to high-speed internet, and there's also a role for policymakers in terms of facilitating competition, which there are. So I know there are some new entrants coming into our market, primarily in the data space, so that you can bring the cost of these internet access down and you can improve the speed, because there's a direct correlation, one, between broadband access and economic growth, but also the speed of broadband access and economic growth. I just using a personal example, I have one provider to put in another provider at home, because when my wife and I are both online and my son is online, the three of us couldn't manage with the one provider. So I just use that as an example to say that, one, there has to be an investment to improve access to broadband. And even while accepting that we can't get devices and everything to all children, for the ones who are most vulnerable, who without access will fall off the cliff, we have to find a way to get those kids on board. So for me, infrastructure would be the first major part of that investment, and then the training would come concurrently with it as well.
And I think Dennis Sims says something true here. It is an investment, but has to start somewhere in any investment phased approach, but with the understanding that over the long term, there will be growth and ROI. However, it begins with a culture shift. I think that's certainly true.
Culture shift.
And
It looked like we probably should have added Andinis on the panel. A good colleague of mine too from the university.
And I think the idea that we see here that Jamaica should be the hub for digital data, knowledge, and information for the Caribbean and known globally for the data protection and privacy. I don't know if it is that easy to make that a reality, but I think it kind of
Start somewhere.
Exactly, it starts somewhere, and as you said, Julian, I think, or both of you, that the outsourcing aspect, or the fact that you can now work for a lot of companies from everywhere, and in that case from Jamaica or the Caribbean, certainly gives a lot of opportunities. I think when I look at Europe, especially Eastern Europe, we have a lot of countries that are in a similar situation, meaning small landmass, small population, very few natural resources, and therefore they also had to focus very early on a very digital business model, and a lot of the stuff that you mentioned earlier on to do that hacks online and so on are or is possible in countries like Estonia and Lithuania and so on. So I think there are examples that we can look at and maybe learn from. All right, before we wrap this up, are there any final thoughts, any final statement from you, gentlemen?
I mean, I would just also encourage individuals, without waiting on programs to be put in place, to seek out yourselves, to self-learn. There are a lot of free resources that are online to just improve your own capability. It makes you more marketable, more adept in this world that we're moving into, which is going to be a very different world from what existed 2 years ago. So all of us, all of us need to, embark on continuous improvement and continuous learning.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I just thank you, Simon, for having us. I mean, these programs themselves are also very helpful in helping individuals, to gather some form of direction as to what to do or think about or where to move to. So I encourage you to continue these conversations because it's a critical part of moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to have these conversations to get the different perspectives and different viewpoints from different areas and different people. So for everybody listening or watching, I hope that was educational for you, gave you some insights and was entertaining. If that's the case, feel free to hit the like button, the subscribe button if you're on YouTube or whatever platform you are watching us right now. And use the comment section to share your thoughts. And I certainly agree with two statements. One, I think we need a culture shift in the mindset, generally speaking. And I would also encourage everybody to don't wait for a government or whoever to make the necessary changes. But there are so much free resources out there where you can educate yourself. A lot of universities offering free courses, things like free coding bootcamp, things of that nature, where you can learn these digital skills are all available out there. You just have to look for it and invest some time and energy. That being said, thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time, and for everybody watching, I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah, man.